like to bring this meeting to order. Please join me in the pledge of allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have one agenda item, and so at this point I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I move we approve the agenda.
Okay, any discussion? Seems like a reasonable thing to do. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay. We will proceed to discuss impact of HB 2242.
Great. I think before we start, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to have us all introduce ourselves because we have some of our bargaining unit representatives joining us, and I'm sure everybody knows who they are. So, Leanna, if you'll start, we'll just go around the table and say who we are. That way, people who at home who are watching will also know who we are. So,
Leanna Crawford. Laura Bowen, Director, District 3.
John Campbell, Director, District 4.
Daniel Rosenbach, Superintendent.
Craig Petty, Director, District 5.
Spencer Britt, Student Board Member.
Ann Jorgensen, WA Member.
Robert Christie, WA Member.
Thank you. So this is the work that the legislature did in 2017, finishing up in July with Senate House Bill 2242 as its response to McCleary, has us where we are. And as we go through, I guess we'll just go through the PowerPoint because everything I would say in introduction kind of is in there anyway. I do want to let people know there are two handouts at the back table for audience members if you would like them. One is the full pages of the PowerPoint slides, and the other one are full pages of the insert on the website that specifically discusses school funding and impact on the community. So both of those will be part of what we talk about this evening. I would like to suggest, I put a lot of stuff into here and I can talk for hours on this, and we don't have that. So I'm going to try to keep it limited and focused on kind of staying to what's on the slides other than what questions that you have. And for the team up here, really do ask questions. It is our hope as we move through this response from our end of things that we can partner with our bargaining units because there are a lot of new requirements and we are going to have to do some things very differently. And we are hoping and we're expecting, we have good relationships, so we plan to meet with our bargaining units on the things. For example, we have NMEA members here tonight. They're going to have to be very much a big part of helping us determine what a new salary schedule looks like in North Mason, since we have to write our own. And the report from OSPI, as you'll hear later, did not come out with a lot of recommendations that are of use. So we will talk about that. Denise, we can just move right on to the next. So, in response to the McCleary lawsuit of 2011, finally in 2017, the legislature adopted HB 2242 to try to make the reforms that they had kind of written in response to McCleary before in kind of some broad, very broad outlines into more of a reality. So what we ended up with was a bill that expects to help us revise completely educational funding, or that was the expectation anyway of the legislators as they wrote the bill. It does overhaul education funding. Whether there are reforms or effective reforms will remain to be seen. There is a lot of detail. It's an almost 200-page bill, but there is also a lot of the vague language that leaves a lot open for interpretation, and depending on what hat you're wearing, you probably have a different interpretation. And so how we come together and come up with a plan that works best for our kids in North Mason is going to be a challenge, but one that I believe that our teams working together can do. There are revisions in our allocations for staffing. We'll talk about that a little later. There are some problems with those increases already, at least for North Mason. There are revisions in how we get funded, specifically with decreases in local levies, increases in state levies. And there's more transparency and accountability. There's a lot more reporting that we have to do. And we will talk about those as we get to some of those sections. So the revised salary allocations include eliminating the current salary allocation model completely. So currently in Washington, for those of you who don't know, we have a teacher salary schedule that is defined by the state that says if you've taught for this many years and you have this many credits, this is how much your base salary is, regardless of where you live. We locally have had the ability to bargain for enhancements beyond that, and there is some remaining provision for that in the bill, but we'll talk about there are some limitations as well. There is also something called the staff mix factor, which helps us decide how, which helps us determine an individual's salary. So just because Rob has been here how many years?
This is year 5.
Year 5, and he has how many credits?
Well over 100.
Okay, so he is a specific place on the salary schedule. But somebody else who's teaching the same job maybe has been here 10 years or 1 year. So even if they have the same credits right now, they would be, there's a formula that applies and they'd be getting different dollars. When we get our salary allocation, they look at the seniority of our staff, how many people have been here a really long time or a really short time, and that adjusts how many total dollars you get to pay our staff. In the new model, we will receive our basic salary allocations based on the statewide average. And so for 2018-19, that is currently projected to be $64,000. So that means instead of getting a model that kind of says, well, we know you have like 70% of your teachers who have been here 20 years and 30 who have been here less, so we're going to skew it to give you a little more at the top end so you have a little bit more money so you can pay all the salaries of the people that you have. We're going to just say, we're just going to give you the average amount that we're going to give out for salaries, and you figure out how to spread it among the people you have, regardless of how long they've been there. Which I'm sure you can imagine some of the problems that might come from that. Even if that means we have at some point in time a really young staff, so that average is giving us more dollars than we might have agreed on for our salary schedule. We have a contract with that staff member, so as they move up the schedule, we might not have all the money we need as they get more senior, if everybody gets more senior at once. So it's going to be really interesting. It's pretty basic math.
One question, when does the current collective bargaining agreement expire?
The current collective bargaining agreement, we're scheduled to start bargaining.
Okay, so it doesn't run past,
August 31st.
okay, so it doesn't run past into this?
No, no, this is in a way kind of good for us. It's also creates some pressures. And we have some ideas that we're working with the union on how to kind of stretch those out so that we can do good work together and come up with an ultimate plan. It also, like I said, revises local levies and local levy effort assistance. I am not going to talk about LEA because we don't get any. So while it's important in other communities, it doesn't have an impact on our budgeting right now. We don't qualify. And then it also limits the use significantly of our levy funds. It increases the state property tax, and I think this is important for folks. That's why we have this handout, and this will be in our district newsletter that goes out in January as well. The state property tax is going to increase by roughly 82 cents per thousand of assessed property value in 2018. So that means with the tax payment that people have to pay coming in January, their property taxes are going up that much. Our local levy does not decrease yet. So in 2018, our community is going to feel a pretty significant property tax increase because of state property tax increases.
And the county, our county is doing a raise on our property taxes, correct?
That failed.
If they
They fail?
yes.
Oh, okay, okay.
Okay,
So, but it's an important thing, you know, all of those pieces have to be made.
all those pieces play together, the junior taxing districts, but it's also important to understand that that state, that's not 81 cents going to us. That's going to the big general fund, where,
Right.
you know, the big, you got another cup of that I can play the little card.
Right,
you know,
so I was
title
thinking
bar.
if we had, what if,
And we
what
might
if we did
get
get
some
that?
of
What
that
was it,
locally,
$1.21
but-
they wanted or something like that?
No,
it didn't
didn't
happen.
happen.
I know, but what if
Yeah.
they did, is there a cap if that ever happens?
Yes.
Okay.
There's a cap,
Okay.
which then it pushes down pressure on the other taxing districts, because there's a certain cap that countywide, nobody can charge over.
Okay.
But once it hits that cap, say, just because of my area of expertise, fire districts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
They
That
get-
was- that
they
was my
get-
gray area.
They
Thank
get
you.
pushed, they get pushed down, so if they're at a certain levy or level, in order to get below that cap, their levy gets reduced automatically, and whatever other,
So
School
actually,
district.
this is referring to, on your property tax statement, there is a line that says state property tax, state taxes.
Yeah.
And then there's local taxes. Well, the state taxes are the ones that are going to increase 81 cents.
Right.
Okay. And that's what people will see on the property
And
tax.
they will see that on their property tax bill. So, in the 2019 year, even though we have already pre-approved a levy at an existing amount, and I'll give the details a little bit further in the presentation, we will only be able to collect a more limited levy. So that is creating a balance there, and some people call this funding model a levy swap, because the state is adding money on, but they're taking away what our voters have already approved and what we have the ability to collect locally. So I think that that is a very important piece for people to understand. We're not getting the same money we always have, and we're not getting, after 2018, the dollars that our voters approved for the next couple of years. We're getting a decreased amount.
And we're not getting the 81 cents per thousand.
No, that will go to the state, and that will be distributed to people based on the allocation model for salaries and maintenance and operating costs and some of the state categorical programs that will help fund all of those things. But it doesn't mean that we're going to get all the 81 cents per thousand that we generate. It also provides dollars for some class size reductions that repeals the class size reductions that were already set in I-1351 for classes beyond third grade. So class size reductions, for example, in K-3 are 17-1, and that was initially going to be a required year for compliance this year, and it includes an average of other staff who serve students who are certificated. So in our district right now, at least on the first day of school, and kids come and go and change, but initially we were under that or at that in all of the required grades because of the averaging. Some classes actually were smaller without the averaging, but CTE class sizes have a new limit in size, right around 26, 20, 25, 26, depending on the course. For some, it's a little lower. Skills Center have class sizes that are more limited as well. It also gives us increased funding for categorical programs, and we'll talk about some of those more specifically further on. But things like LAP, transitional, bilingual, and highly capable, special ed. The problem with in each of those cases, the rules for how we can use those dollars are much more delineated. So the fences are higher. It's harder to say, well, because we got additional LAP money, we can, for example, increase salaries at a building, because that wouldn't meet the requirements of the rules that have now been put in place. So it's great to get the extra dollars, but one of the things that we're going to be asking for as a superintendent's group, and some of the other groups I speak with are going to be asking for when the legislature returns, is thanks for the money, take away the fences so we can determine what will help us meet kids' needs,
Yeah.
and we can work with our staff to determine how to spend the money. So any help we can get with that will be greatly appreciated. We have an increase in special education funding. The current cap, I think, is 12.7%. I have it in another slide again. it's increasing to 13.5%. So what that means is statewide we would get funded to have 13.5% of our kids in special education. We're currently at about 11.5%, so we're under the cap. We have some very significant different kinds of needs to meet in some of our buildings, but they aren't necessarily all special education needs. Again, they are special student needs, and having more dollars with the flexibility to apply them where needed would be very helpful so that we can staff to meet, for example, some very significant behavior needs that we have, like many other districts that aren't necessarily special education needs. It also creates a new school employee benefit board, which is new to most of us. Certainly, this is a little bit of an area of expertise for you too, but the goal of the bill is that by the 2020 fiscal year, or actual year 2020, school employees will be part of a benefit board, like the fire department is at the state level right now, and other public employees, so that it will change how school employee benefits are distributed and how those get allotted to us.
So we don't currently have employees involved in our benefits?
Oh, we do.
Yeah.
But this will be a statewide benefits board that'll say,
Oh, okay.
instead of like districts right now, we in North Mason have an employee committee who meets with representatives and every year and determines what we're going to offer for health insurance and what we're going to offer for. That is determined by our employee committee with representatives from each group. But the things that are available are outside of a state organization. So now it will be, basically what it means is school employees' benefits will be negotiated at the state level, and it won't be part of our bargaining anymore, in the simplest way.
So that's another expense.
Well, depending on who you ask again, there are pluses and there are minuses. So
It's a loss of local control, but I think it's a plus and minus. I mean, it increases your buying power when it comes to health
it should
insurance.
bring our costs down.
But
But the selection is not going to be.
it's not, it doesn't, we're not going to get the, be able to say what works for us. And not always that, we're so special that we need
Right.
this.
But sometimes we are.
But it's a local control thing.
Would this mean we couldn't tailor ours to special local
And
needs?
That's right.
And that's a huge concern with our cancer insurance, that supplemental would go away. Our extra disability insurance, we currently buy that at the local level, and the district can offer access to extra insurances. All of that would now be not bargainable unless they decide to offer it at the state level.
So the district, but we could do things, but without bargaining them. So it's
The cost then that way would then rise to employees
Right.
rather than.
Yeah. So, although the one thing that's an interesting line that I haven't figured out how they're going to do this, but it will be interesting if it actually works, is one of the lines regarding benefits says that under the new benefit board, the cost for an employee plus children cannot be more than if it were a single employee.
Right.
So that sounds really good as a parent. If I were
Because
paying the same
currently
as
we pay more.
a single teacher
Yeah.
for insurance, but I'm not sure how
Is that-
economically that works.
Is that a mandate that we?
Yes,
we
it's
under-
under School Employees Benefit Board. It's a mandate of this bill. So,
I think the only way it makes sense is the fact that, you with your children will pay the exact same amount as me, so my insurance rates will probably rise as a single individual, but yours,
Exactly.
but,
I
so
won't
I'll be
get your
subsidizing
rate.
yours for one,
Yeah.
instead of the other way around.
Thank
Exactly.
you. Thank you for that.
you're welcome. Really appreciate that, Rob. And, one of the things is we all know that the legislature has the prerogative to change things. And there are various groups, whether it's WEA or WASDA or WASA or AWSP or PSC, different groups that represent different members of the school employees' life, are lobbying for changes in different parts of this bill. So what actually comes into play each year as we move through the transition may be different than we think today. So what I'm giving you today is what I know best from what's been released and what has been approved by the legislature so far, but that doesn't mean some of it might not change. So we were waiting for an order. The order came out on November 15th from the Supreme Court, and basically what it said was, you know what, the state has satisfied our mandate in the MCCLEARY lawsuit to fully fund the program of basic education as determined by these two stated bills and the definition in those of what basic education was. One of those is the prototypical school funding model. So, you know, it doesn't mean it's all of our definition of basic education or even mine, but it's the one they said they were going to be looking for. However, it may not totally be adequate. They want to wait and see how it actually plays out, so they're maintaining jurisdiction. And the part that hasn't met the requirement is the timeline, because the timeline, the requirement was for the start of the school for 2018, a fully funded model needed to be in place. The legislators argued before the court that it was in place because even though it's a multi-year rollout plan, they've determined the plan and they've told us what it is and we're moving forward. The Supreme Court was not happy with that answer, and so there is a significant amount of pressure at this time on the state legislature to move up their timeline for fully implementing the requirements of 2242, which will have an impact on the work we do with our local bargaining units to figure out how we're going to do this. The timeline gave us enough time to pay everybody reasonable and spend the time to really build an effective plan. And you know, when you're talking with lots of people, you don't sit down and decide on something you all agree to in 1 or 2 sessions. So compressing the timeline could make our work a little harder and put a little more pressure on our staff and on both sides or around the table, but it is what it is. Court was specific, though, I think in the next slide, that they were satisfied that the salary model provides for full funding of salaries sufficient to recruit and retain staff. I
don't agree.
No, and probably in this presentation, when we get to those slides, you will definitely hear an opinion. But no, it doesn't, and in fact, it codifies some inequities that are very troubling, particularly for those of us in Mason County. So, next slide.
You sent me a stupid question, but what would be the percentage of schools that would agree with that?
Well, I can't give you the exact percentage, but I can tell you what counties would agree. Snohomish and King and Clark.
That's great.
Yeah. So again, the court's going to retain jurisdiction. They're going to continue to fine the legislature $100,000 a day, and they need full compliance achieved during this legislative session. So there's quite a bit of pressure.
And specifically the regular legislative session, they have to report back to the court by tax day this year.
Yes, it has to be done in April. They cannot extend
They
it.
can extend, but they still have to
But they
report to
have
the
to
court
extend
on the
this.
15th.
Yeah. No, and they don't, the problem is, see, I've got to say this in a nice way. The fine, as determined by the Supreme Court, has to be budgeted and approved by the legislature.
This court order did actually say, though, for the first time, I think, that it actually has to be placed into a separate account. So technically, the court is looking for them before April to actually have put that money somewhere, as opposed to symbolically push it off. But they have everything
Even
else.
even
Very
the
good point.
retroactive money that from day one that they
Yeah.
got, oh, that's good.
We'll see if it happens, but.
So we'll see.
Such a good.
There you go. All right, next slide, Denise. So there are three main areas that affect us in North Mason under 2242. And you probably have anticipated what those are already, but basically we have a change in our revenue stream and our funding model. We have changes in employee compensation, and we have changes in accounting rules. And so let's move on. Yeah, there's a lot of detail on this slide. Probably this slide is the main reason I gave you a paper copy. But anyway, some of the changes in the revenue stream, or the ones that are biggest dollar amounts for us right now, are listed. So the statewide property tax rate goes to $270 per thousand. Our local levy will decrease in 2018. Salary allocations, as I said before, are based on statewide averages, adjusted for inflation beginning from this year. So the salary allocation for CIS is certificated instructional staff. The average dollar amount for certificated instructional staff is $64,000. The certificated administrative staff is $95,000, and the classified staff is $45,000. Those will adjust each year according to IPD, which is an alternate, I've got my cheat sheet here, an alternate federal system used to figure out cost of living increases. So you have Consumer Price Index, which is more regularly used, but in this piece of legislation they chose IPD instead, implicit price deflator. The IPD number is usually a smaller percentage than the Consumer Price Index. So it is. Right now, in the June, the projection for that IPD change in 2018 was to be about 2.7%. All indicators are, and that number will be issued in January, all indicators are right now that that number could be as high as 3%, but until it actually gets determined, we're just guessing. So there is a regionalization factor for some districts, not for us. We'll talk about that couple minutes. They increased the maximum funded student percentage in special ed from 12.7% to 13.5%. Increased high cap funding to say, instead of having roughly 2% of students are eligible to create funding for us for highly capable programs, it's now 5%. The class size reduction in K-3 becomes required for compliance beginning next school year. We got increases in maintenance and operating costs in MSOC. They are defined though. This amount is only for science classrooms, and this amount is for other things as defined. We got LAP, typo there. We increased LAP funding for designated high poverty schools, which this year we were one of those, so we got a significant bump in our LAP dollars with very significant rules about how we can spend those new dollars that we're working hard to do. One of the benefits, though, for us as a high poverty district is that we have the ability for use those dollars to help us support some of our highest need students. So, for example, we have been working, and our staff continues to work, and will, on meeting the needs of some very high need students with regard to behavior in the primary grades or with mental health concerns, and we can use those dollars to fund additional outside of the district support, including psychiatric evaluations where appropriate, so they can help us help kids and their families better and ensure that our teachers and kids are in safe learning environments. So that's one of the uses that the way that we're applying them, we can use them for if we're very careful. Not everything that we'd like to do with those dollars can we do, because the rules are very specific, but Ann Crosby is doing a very good job of reading those rules and asking questions and finding ways the best that we can within the fences to stretch them to meet the needs of kids in North Mason. And then increase transitional bilingual dollars, so we did get additional dollars, which is wonderful because we have increased students who are needing language services. So just to give you some specific revenue detail here, our current rate at our levy is just over 21% at $4.6 million. Our new rate as of 2019 will decrease to 14.1% and will be just $3.4 million that we can collect. And then levies, beginning with tax, another typo, sorry guys. Beginning with taxes levied in 2019, the maximum levy is the lesser of $1.50 per thousand of assessed value or $2,500 per pupil, and this number will be increased also using the inflation indicator with each year. However, we are the 150 per thousand. We do not get the $2,500 per student rate. So that's what generates that $3.4 million amount on the previous slide. Also new with levies, another accounting rule is in the future when we run a levy, we will have to get OSPI approval before it can go on the ballot of what we want to spend our levy dollars on. We will have to submit, once we submit our plan, they have 30 days to review it and get back to us. If they didn't approve our plan, we have to resubmit and they have another 30 days. So that means some really advanced planning is going to be required before you can even put a levy on the ballot. Then once we have approval from OSPI and approval from our voters, we will have a special report that's due every year proving that we've only spent our dollars the way that we said we were going to spend them. And we will have an additional audit done by the state auditor's office to make sure that we're telling the truth. So,
will they give us parameters around what those levy expenditures
yeah, they can only be for enrichment activities as defined in the bill. So
But currently, it's very open as to
Right.
what enrichment is on really K2 robotics.
that would actually work.
It would.
That would work.
But there are lots of things that they did not have a defined list. So.
And there are a lot of things that people are trying to squeeze into the definition that probably don't fit, even though it's vague. So it's going to be one of the areas we work with our staff team to figure out. OSPI was tasked with creating a stronger definition, and their response to that task was to copy and paste the definition in the law and hand it out to all of us and say this is what it is. So that's where we are. So if you change your, I lost my train of thought when I said that.
Sorry.
If you change the enrichment levy plan during the lifetime of the levy, so if you run a 4-year levy, a next new levy is run for 4 years like we did last time, and we find we need to spend the money slightly differently than we said before, we have to submit a new plan and get it approved before we can spend that money.
Oh my God.
So is there any reason at this point with the fact that we have to submit a plan anyways, why we couldn't just say, since it's going to be kind of capped anyways, just run like a 10-year levy and just, submit changes every couple of years as needed?
Probably not. There's not a reason not. I don't think anybody's ever run more than 4 years.
Do
But
they have permanent levies? Is that an option?
I don't know. I could find out. That's a good question.
The
we-
only problem is with inflation. You've got this set amount, and then oops, everything went up, and now you need more money.
Well, maybe it could be written to how the levy's written, saying that it's the max
There
is going to
are
be tied
some
with
changes
inflation.
as to how you get to write your language now, too. So we've just gotten some new parameters, and I will be really honest, I haven't read those yet because we don't get to write a new levy for a couple of years, so I figure I have at least a few months before I have to read those rules. Yeah. But then on the next, this again, I can't say this enough. We are now going to be audited on our levy plan, and did we only spend our money on what we said in the plan? And are we, so it's just another level to the auditor's work. It's going to require that we set up a separate system of accounts for levy expenditures. So even if we spend something on levy in Rob's class, I'm going to have Rob's line item for basic ed budget and levy budget and special ed and anything I would spend. So
what's going to happen, or you probably don't know this yet since you haven't read all the parameters, as you said. Do we know what's going to happen? Let's say, for example, I run knowledge bowl at the high school. If part of this we put in, say $3,000 to fund it, if I only spend $2,000 a year, is there any parameters for what would happen with that extra
yeah,
$1,000?
then we would have to write a new plan, or we can't spend the extra $1,000.
Wow.
So we're going to have to, when we write our levy plan, we're going to have to write it as vague as we can get away with and get it approved. Yeah, which is kind of what you do
Auditor's
with
office.
sort of budgets anyway. On the next slide, kind of what this does is shows you on current dollars. So currently, we are collecting $4.6 million a year. In 2019, that drops to, well, actually 3.5, not 3.4, that we can collect, even though the voters approved the 4.6. So our voters will get a nice drop in their levy bill in 2019.
But they'll get an increase in that.
But they'll get an increase in 18
So we have to remember that these are calendar years.
calendar years. So
not
it starts
school
in
years.
January.
So, right.
So then what I included on this slide is, and I didn't put it under both sections because I had actually do a projection for what we think we would spend in 2019 on transportation, special education, MCCLEARY, and other compensation costs, basically for those employees that we have who are not covered by the funding model, by the prototypical school model, because we have more teachers, we have more paras, we have more pick a job than are funded by the prototypical school model. We're funded for a 0.2 of a nurse district-wide, and we have 1.8. So, so it picks up those costs. So those things are projected to cost us about $2.5 million in 2019. Now you remember, levies are for enrichment activities. We actually, this is one place in looking at this bill, and we look better than our colleagues in Kitsap County. In Central Kitsap, they're actually in the red after they pay for those things. So sports, they have no money for in 2019. Student activities, no money in 2019. We still have $1 million, which is less than we currently spend on all of those kinds of things, but at least we have some money. The next slide shows you, even with the fully funding, and this is for our whole ESD to kind of just give you a picture of where we are in compared with everybody else. So we're in the middle of the page, and we highlighted some significant issues, although for us there's actually a bigger one. In the budget for this year, based on the dollars we're getting from the state, and this is the first year of the new budget under 2242, we are $100,000 short in transportation that we are paying for out of levy dollars. We're actually $100,000 to the good based on the prototypical school model in special education. But because we have some significant needs beyond that, we've already spent well over that $100,000 in staffing for some individual students with more needs. And our MCCLEARY are actually underfunded by almost $500,000. So those are also things that we pay for out of the levy. So when you look at that and you think those are unfunded dollars, and on the previous slide, I showed you we don't really have $1 million for students other than basic education for music, orchestra class or the other things that we're trying to do.
And then you have a small district like Clay Valley,
Yeah,
and they are hit hard.
they're hit really hard. And they don't have a lot of leeway. I mean, that's, well, Hood Canal, just in the 2018, in the first year of the budget, you know how big they are compared to us. We have an increase this year, and we appreciate it. But in Hood Canal, they're actually almost $1 million lower than last year in their state allocation. And that's,
And I don't want to be off track because I want to be specific to us, but the other schools like CK, Bremerton, South, they also do a lot of federal funding.
they
right?
do get a lot
So
of
they're-
good funding. So like, they get the funding for being near the base. We get a very small amount of that. It's roughly $40,000 a year, Denise, that we get, where they get millions. You know, that could change as more military families move in our direction, as housing gets built out and out of the expense.
But these numbers have
level.
nothing to do with that. right?
This is just state funding, just basic education. So, there are, on the next slide, some overall positive impacts. So, there is the increase again in special education funding. We have had salary allocation increases, and they have now built in that IPD increase into the law. So getting a COLA to take away a COLA now would kind of have to be a new law to say you don't get a COLA because it's built into the
What was
2242.
IPD? What was that again?
IPD stands for implicit price deflator. It's another,
Okay.
it's a federal statistic that you can use.
Takes away from the CPI, like the local figures
Right.
now, CPI,
Okay.
Yeah.
which doesn't make any sense.
Because we could use CPI, but they chose to use that instead.
Do you know if they break that down by region in the state?
The IPD that they're going to use is the Seattle one for everybody. So, which is good for us and other districts. They are funding by the final year the 3 learning, remember the LID days, the learning improvement days, which we kept and fund out of our local levy. They are going to provide the funds for those days, adding 1 year at a time in 18, 19, and 20 until they are funding those again.
So 1 year, 1 day.
So
2
one day
days,
next
and 3
year,
days.
a second day, and then, so we'll have 3. But we're already doing that with our levy dollars that are getting decreased. So I don't know that that's really going to be, hopefully that just stays flat for us, but it doesn't really provide an increase. And then our local levy taxes will be decreased. So, challenges are, these are only some of them. Probably anybody in the room can come up with a list much longer than this, because I know my list is pages. But the basic education is not fully funded. Although the state Supreme Court found that to be the case, I would argue that it is not. There's no salary schedule, so that means all 295 districts have to figure something out on their own, which promotes just that bargaining separately, promotes staff inequities between districts, and it also promotes playing each other against each other as we're going through that process. It really complicates collective bargaining, and it's going to exacerbate teacher shortages for some districts. And I'll talk more about some of that. There's no staff mix factor, so that incentivizes us to hire less experienced teachers. Because if we're getting $64,000, regardless of the teacher, and we have to spread that dollar amount out. If we hire the younger teachers, we'll be better able to pay them that dollar amount plus whatever enhancements we agree to in bargaining than if all of our teachers are at the other end of the salary schedule.
Now, can I ask a question? Was my understanding that the $64,000 was an average, that the state was telling us, here's your bottom salary and here's your top salary?
So the
And
state
you
said,
figure it out in between?
yeah, so what they're giving us is $64,000 per staff generated on the funding model. What we have for parameters for the salary schedule that we're going to negotiate is that a beginning teacher has to make 40,000. The most we in our district can pay teachers at the top end is 90,000. And after 5 years, a new teacher has to at least have a 10% increase. That's the rules. Then they also said, well, even though we're only giving you the 64,000 to spread out among everybody, you can also negotiate and choose to pay an additional 10% above the base to a STEM teacher, to a bilingual teacher, to a special education teacher, to counselors and school psychs and ESAs. But you have to get that out of the $64,000 per person that we give you.
What defines a STEM teacher?
Every K-5 teacher ever,
Well,
according to our,
according to WEA,
according to our certificate. Well, no, according to our certificate
Yeah.
and our renewal process,
if you
now
teach
every
science,
K-5 teacher.
technology, education, or math, you're a STEM teacher.
How many teachers?
So
do we
every
have?
general elementary teacher, yes, is now a STEM
Roughly,
teacher.
how many teachers and educators do we have?
140.
About 150,
Yeah.
right around 150.
So anyway, and enrichment is not well defined, and there are really some severe unintended consequences of the regionalization factor, or at least I'm going to assume they were unintended. So going on to the regionalization factor, and I think this is really important to understand. And I know our community members, every time I talk to someone, they haven't heard of this, and it's very frustrating for them as it is for us. So under this new regionalization factor, which applies in 1819, we are funded in Mason County at the state basic amount per staff member, the 64,000. Even though part of us is in Kitsap County, and I do point that out each time I bring this up, Kitsap County is funded at the top level at 18, the base plus 18%. So the average salary in 2018 at that, with that regionalization for us would be 59,333. You can see it there, and it would be 70,000. For administrators, it would go from what we're funded for right now would be the 79 in this year and 93 next year. For classified, 39 to 47. So really for them, it's the biggest percent of their salaries. So if you look at comparing the salary for employees to the salary of a like position in the neighboring district, that's for teachers $1.2 million less that we're getting than we would get if we had the 18%. For administrators, that's $120,000 less than we would get to help us pay the salaries. And for classified, it's almost, 250. So almost, it's 1.6 million less that we're getting to pay the salaries we're paying plus try to be competitive than if we had the 18% regionalization.
That's so disheartening.
Is South and Peninsula the same way?
Peninsula is at 12%. South is at 18%, Central, Bremerton, North, Bainbridge, Port Townsend's at 12%. Everybody but all the rest of Kitsap is at 18%. All of Mason County is at 0%. In Pierce County, it varies from 6 to 12%. They don't have any 18s. In Thurston, I don't think they have any 18s. They might have one. They have some 0s, some 6s, and some 12s. But the language in the bill says that the regionalization is going to be based on the average single-family housing cost in your district. The difference between an average single-family housing cost, according to the Realtors Association, because that's who I called and asked, in Mason County and in Kitsap County is 7%. So that doesn't atone for that. Now, when I asked a legislator who was on the committee drafting this list of school districts how they determined that, at least in the Puget Sound region, they knew that the Seattle School District was going to be at 18%. So they looked at districts that were within 15 miles on the map, and if they were in 15 miles, they got the 18%. According to the rules, if you're within 15 miles of a district that's getting the higher amount, you would qualify for that higher amount. So that doesn't tell us why the legislature didn't give North Mason any money.
Well, they were within 15
Because they
miles,
didn't
so
follow
what do
their
we
own
need to
rules.
do to change
So
that?
we are continuing to force that issue, because if they're going to set a set of rules, then we shouldn't be the only school
Right.
district that,
I think what
It doesn't
more
apply
about
to
that
it.
is we don't require our employees to live in the school district.
And in
So
fact,
that-
most of our employees don't live in the
So
city.
that's, but instead of making it like school districts even, I mean, I don't necessarily equate us with the rest of the Mesa school districts, maybe minus Shelton, because they don't provide high school services.
right,
So,
yeah, so there's a lot there that doesn't make sense, that I know our association will continue to argue, and all the rest of them too. And I think, again, like we talked about last year, when we have the opportunity to go down and talk to the legislature about these inequities, we will be more listened to if we take a unified voice of union leadership and district leadership instead of one or the other. So hopefully that's what we can do.
I just asked you, could you expand a little bit on how this law basically legislates inequities into our system?
Well, yeah, the application of the law says that we are going to pay a different salary allocation to a school district based on a regional decision, which basically that says your zip code says that your kids are more important than our zip code says our kids are.
That
So-
irritates me a great deal.
And me. So would it be, would you recommend that we call our legislators?
I would recommend you have
Send
every
letters
possible
and-
contact. Call them, send letters. When we go down to the Hill, you go with us. When we know they're talking about these things, if we can go together, union and leadership, we will be heard in that kind of a partnership, because you know, what usually happens when the legislature puts us in this kind of a position where we're going to be bargaining, and we're going to have conversations that, you know, when we talk about people's compensation, it's personal and it's hard to talk about, and those are hard conversations to keep collegial. And in this district, we have worked so hard to do that. I know we will continue to do that, but they are not used to seeing administrators and teachers coming together and saying this is not okay. So when we do that, we get heard.
The other piece that kind of goes with that too is, you know, there's some rumbling that, like, for example, our local legislatures do not actually think that the regionalization factor should have been part of it at all. Our local legislators actually thought, no,
They
every
fought
school
against
should
it.
get the same, which a lot of it could be saying, oh, well, you don't want a legislation, you know, you don't want localization factor? Fine, we might give you one.
Well, yeah, however, you know, the other part that's important to understand, the other part that's really important to understand is that there was another line item in the bill, and that was enhanced salaries for high poverty districts that we qualified for. That bill, part of the bill, passed along with the rest of the bill. Governor Inslee vetoed that line.
And then is he up for what's
Exactly. So, you know, he took care of the Seattle corridor, but he did not take care of the rest of the state, and it's a concern. And we need to make that concern heard. So, the consequences of the regionalization factor I put in here, you know, the single greatest factor in that part, advancing student achievement, is the teacher. The teacher is the most important thing that we have, and now we're being told that, you know, our teachers might not be as important as somebody else's because we don't need as much money to pay them. And achievement gaps persist for students in poverty, and we have a poverty issue. Regionalization as it currently exists expands inequity, and staff development and staff migration between districts is growing. So for example, between instructional coaching and other professional development that we provide, we spend $360,000 or more a year in this district on those kinds of professional development for staff. We have other kinds of high needs training, Project Lead the Way. We spend $8,000 per teacher to get them trained to provide that STEM classroom for our kids, AP teacher training, new teacher training, all the things we do and all the training we do for special kinds of programs. So we're going to get staff, even though we're going to be competing. And there are some ways we can get around that initially, maybe, but eventually the regionalization model will catch up with us. So what's going to happen is districts like ours will become the farm team for local districts. We'll bring people in, we'll train them, we'll help them develop really good skills, and then they're going to have to choose where they need to go to support their families or to support their retirement, and we're going to always be hiring and training. So.
Yeah, that was an important part in some of the legislative assembly meetings, what Anna just said.
So I kind of did what's underfunded even currently in the dollars we receive this year or next year in compensation. So what's going to have to come out of our levy or somewhere because it's not coming out of basic ed. And so you can see that in total classified funding, total certificated admin costs, total certificated staff costs, we're not fully funded this year. Yes, we're better funded in 18-19, but still not fully funded. 18-19 is the year we will have some higher levy dollars. The following year, this gets a little better, but it's still not all the way there. So there are some concerns. So OSPI actually has some rules of things they have to do under House Bill 2242-2. The first one was develop a salary grid recommendation by December 1st. I'll talk about that on the next slide. They have to develop a per pupil allocations report by grade level for the state. So how much did they allocate each school district for each grade level for dollars per child? They have to study the safety net process for special education and review the rules and see if it makes sense. They have to write rules to define the additional activities to be considered enrichment. I already told you they have already notified us that they don't need to write those rules because they feel that the language in the bill is defined enough and we can just use that to figure out what enrichment is when we're working with our teachers. They need to amend systems to accept district reporting of supplemental contracts. They need to draft revenue to expenditure accounting guidance. They need to establish sub-funds in the accounting system so that we can track line items by levy and basic ed and more detailed than we have. They need to amend the systems for school districts because we are now going to be required to turn in every year and to be audited on a 4-year budget rather than a 1-year budget. And they're going to revisit class size compliance rules for 18-19. So OSPI progress on the salary grid recommendations that were due on December 1st. They did not reach consensus, although OSPI did release a report on December 5th. They discussed 6 possible models within the report, and the report explains why each of those models won't actually work in any given school district to use the amount of dollars allocated to pay the beginning salary and the top end salary. In most cases, you can pay one or the other, but not both. So you need to figure out what kind of teachers you want and only hire those. And then so at the end of his report, Superintendent Reichel recommends that this provision be revisited with the attention to staff mix and regionalization issues, and those might need to be brought back in to play to staff mix, particularly to help us be able to pay teachers across the years of experience and to effectively be able to keep teachers working and in our districts. So that's everything in summary.
Does it seem like OSPI is on the side of the school districts or legislature?
It seems like OSPI
Or are they just
doesn't necessarily agree with the legislature's evaluation of how well they did, and where the previous superintendent would call them to task and sometimes behave in ways that some people found inappropriate, the current state superintendent is just going to step off to the side and let things play out. Question?
Question, just a comment, all of this is subject to the next legislative session.
There could be changes. I think the one we most anticipate is the timeline right now says this year we had a bit of a transition, a little bit of a bump in salaries. Next year is supposed to be the transition year, so we have really big limits on whether we can do any raises for next year and what those can look like. And then the following year, the new salary schedule has to be in place. That's the piece that the Supreme Court specifically called out and said, we're not sure. We're pretty, they didn't say we're not sure. The legislators did not do what we told them to do because this isn't in place for the beginning of the 18-19 school year. So it is very possible, and in talking to some legislators already, that they feel quite a bit of pressure to change that in moving the timeline forward so that we don't have a year and a half to come up with a new salary schedule, but rather a half a year.
So there won't be a statewide salary schedule. We have to.
There will not be a
Each
statewide
district
salary
has to
schedule.
come in. Again, subject to the legislature again.
Yeah, they asked, like I said, they asked OSPI to come up with a model. They came up with 6. 3 or 4 of them, depending on how you read it, are basically simplifications of the current statewide salary schedule and designated to be used in the interim year, in the transition year only. 2, roughly, really 2. 1 is kind of weird, but doesn't look like it makes sense at all. 2 of them are based on the compensation technical working group model that was prepared in one of those bills we talked about several back that would have simplified the schedule to just a few steps and recognition, much higher beginning salary than in the compensation technical working group. Their recommended beginning salary was $48,000, so the legislators didn't hit that. But based on that model, fewer boxes and less raises, but just other than cost of living over time. So,
So currently, we have a year 1, and it goes out to year 15, as I think back. And then over here, it's 15 credits,
right.
45, or however it all works out. So right now, we have X number of people that fit into all of those boxes. If we develop a new salary schedule, which we will have to do,
We could have
Is
one
it-
box, or we could have 100 boxes, or we could have.
but if we were to slot everybody in, can we do this without harm? I guess is my
Well,
question.
that's our goal, and really frankly, to do that, although I think that we have very smart people on our admin team and very smart people on our bargaining team, it's a big job. So we have contracted with some legal support to help us through the bargain, to help us work together to develop an effective plan. And part of the reason we did that is the firm that we have contracted with represents numerous districts across the state. And in my experience, they have been able to come to the table when districts have been going, what are we going to do? Or districts and unions together have been going, okay, we agree on this problem, but we can't seem to agree on a solution to the problem. And they've been able to bring in the examples from all the other unions and all the other districts that they're working with and say, well, this problem that you guys are addressing is kind of like the one they had in Bellingham or Spokane or, Vancouver. And this is the solution they came up with. Is there a way we can look at that and help it, make it work for you? So that's really why we're bringing them in, to help help us steal everybody else's idea to create a plan that works.
It seems to me that if the regionalization issue could be resolved, if the inequity there could be resolved, that would greatly help.
That would help us a lot. It would help our staff.
Right.
It would help us be competitive locally, because, you know, our staff, we have really good staff, and they deserve to be compensated like their neighbors are
Hear,
being
hear.
compensated.
Absolutely.
And we need to have the flexibility to be able to do that. So that is something that we're working on. Representatives and senators have assured us, Senator Rolfus, that they're going to take a look at that, because it really wasn't their intent to create the kind of inequity that they created for North Mason.
And we're not the only district that is penalized, or are we?
Other districts are, but we are the only one that's a 0 next to an 18.
I was gonna say, I'd guess most of the others probably kind of spread out, like you'll have 18s, then 12s, then 6s, then 0s, whereas
Yeah.
So the Kitsap County line, that's 3 miles up the road here.
That's in our
doesn't-
district?
That's in our district, yes. So that's part of my argument with the legislators. So, yeah,
I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist here.
there are many of them out there.
But I can't help but think, like, there's the wizard behind the curtain with all this stuff, and by no means this is my opinion, just kind of where my head's going listening to all this. You know, when you talk about the school employee benefit board, you talk about the regionalization issues, you talk about, why not just blow up all independent school districts and just empower the educational regional ESDs and say, hey, ESD 114, you are now the official school board for the region of the Olympic Peninsula. Go forth and prosper. And the capital 113 down there and over there. I mean, it's driving them. It's a limit. It's going to, this is an unintended consequence, and this is just what I see, predict. This is going to push those small school districts
They're not going to be able to do
to combine. And
Well-
you're going to lose these little districts that I remember previous time, a lot of Eastern Washington, I mean, and even North Mason, there's a lot of private surrounds. I mean, this is a community identity.
Right, but we were 5 or so different districts at one time
Exactly.
ourselves. And, you know, part of the issue is when I talk with Ashley, and Ashley apologizes, but she really got hit with the flu, and we don't want her here tonight.
No.
The rest of us sick.
Fine.
But, you know, when we look at the additional work in all, and I only highlighted a couple of the additional reports that are going to be required now, she's already come in and said, you know, we don't have enough staff to do all these reports. If we have to hire more staff
That
in
was
the
the
business
question.
office, that's money we're not spending on staff, where my preference would be, and not that I don't like our business office, but I would rather have more bodies with kids than
right,
running
right.
numbers.
And that's the collateral damage.
And that's the collateral
Yeah.
damage.
I mean, why not just make all teachers state employees at this point?
Well,
And I'm not.
No, I know.
I mean,
Are you
it's
saying
just-
like you want to make like a teacher pool? Are you talking that?
That's where it's headed.
Yeah.
In what my
Well,
opinion is.
And then we just get to use, maybe the teachers rotate and then we're coming,
Well,
they're all paid the same.
And it's
But that's-
not by
You're
any
really
means
talking about the
my-
loss of local
No.
control.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
We don't want to do that.
Exactly.
You know, you look at, the only thing they gave us was the salary schedule, which really, all it does is put us in line. You know, it's, hey, you guys can create your own salary schedules.
However you want to do it, go for
Really?
Yeah,
it.
we're a show. They're just
Yeah,
how
but
creative we
create
can
it
be.
with
Yeah,
less money
here,
than your-
but here,
your
you know,
neighbor.
this is your pot to do it.
Yeah.
And so, I mean.
Well, we might
and-
as well be amazing at it and just do something great.
Well,
Whatever we can do.
On an interesting piece with it, that working group that was trying to come up with the salary models that basically said, yeah, we don't have enough time to do this, they were allocated 6 hours to basically
That's all they meant.
reinvent the wheel.
That's
No,
all
they basically,
meant.
and they were budgeted for, they can meet 3 more hours at this point, but they were only given 6 as a basic for trying to reinvent the wheel for the entire state.
Well, I say we tackle that inequity in the regionalization first.
Well, that,
really
we
lean
have to
hard
all
on
work
that.
together to push that something changes with that, because that is not okay for North Mason.
No.
And I just want to add as legislative rep and as a member of the legislative council, the equalization bit, when I've mentioned that, that really gets a lot of traction from people like ourselves, smaller schools like ourselves.
Well, and most of Eastern Washington was left out and gets nothing too.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Some of the larger, more, that are off school districts, I gave a presentation about this in, one of the conferences when we were voting on the provisions that would go into our legislative agenda. And it really broke the boos and claps, really broke along large district, small district lines. But for those of us in small districts, there was a lot of feeling on this. So I think that this is really an area that and the collateral damage that results once you do that, and then, sketch the number of things that result. I think that's exactly the place where everybody, including all of our taxpayers out there, need to realize this is where our best interests lie, and we really need to let our legislators know that we do not appreciate being a farm team for other districts, and we really want regional justice.
My kids deserve just as well paid teachers as
they
their
do,
relatives.
and they deserve the money to spend on all the things that the teachers need in the rooms to help the kids too. And if we're getting different levels of funding,
Yeah, exactly.
yes, people can be very creative around here and figure things out, but it shouldn't have to.
Well, our legislators pay on a regionalization
Well, I
model.
That is a great question.
Why don't we pay them the hourly rate and
Yeah, why don't they get, their
That'll
neighbor
never
gets
happen.
18% more, they just don't.
They make their own rules. They're about the law.
Does anyone have any more questions for
I just wanted to say thank you for putting this out. I didn't understand. I still have a lot of more digging to do to understand it fully, but you really laid it out where I feel like I've learned more. So, and you were really ready for this, so thank you.
There's a lot to do. We're going to probably continue to talk about this more. We're certainly going to be meeting with our leaders in NMEA and PSE and the bus drivers union to include them in problem solving. Yes, Ron?
My question is, I'm just looking at what the legislators said a couple of years ago before they tackled this. They were saying stuff like transportation's fully funded, but as you showed here, we're still paying some of that out of our levies. So it's like, where's the couple $100,000 we're paying there coming from that was fully funded? What happened to that?
And you're right, and they continue to say transportation is fully funded, and then we point that out, and we have to say except in Harris Mason. And the reason is that transportation funding formula is fully funded, and that works if you're driving in Seattle on city blocks. It doesn't work if you're driving in North Mason and you have to drive around Hood Canal and the lakes and where there are actually roads on the hills that we have, because you can't drive in straight lines. And
We're funded as the crow flies,
we are, yes.
which doesn't make sense in this district.
No.
Well, I guess we should be getting 18%.
That's right.
Right?
Dan was very helpful to me in getting me prepped for a couple of presentations about Wausau's legislative position. And the very things that she's mentioned here, these inequities were the ones that really got responses from my colleagues in smaller districts, around the state. And this just goes to show that we're not alone, and I think we have a political wind at our back. And so if people out there would let their legislators know, and we all, put pressure on Olympia, I think we can get something done. At least I'm hoping.
Well, we do, and I think it's important to note that whether you're talking to a legislator or representatives from some of our different organizations, that everyone is very clear that the McCleary case was not about equity. It was about funding. It was about ample funding, which is the line that it addressed in the state constitution. The second paragraph after that one addresses equity. And the news group that brought the lawsuit initially, when they made their most recent pleading to the Supreme Court, was very clear, and they said, we asked you to address the first paragraph. We did not ask you to address the second paragraph, equity. We know that the legislature has not addressed that. The legislature, in their argument, said, we did not address equity. So everybody knows it's an inequitable solution. So all of those people should then, therefore, be willing to address equity, I hope, without it having to be a follow-up lawsuit about the equity of the funding model in Washington State. Oh, yeah.
I
Long
graduated
ago.
last year. You know, this decade.
But yours has not graduated yet.
They could be the Patty for equity.
Patty.
Thank you very much for a very detailed and I thought succinct presentation given the complexity of the subject. I think this was something extraordinary job of summation. So our next meeting will be on December 21st this year at 6:30 p.m. at this very place. And with that, our special meeting